The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, so we have another major sentence in the Trump-Russia investigation. This is Michael Cohen, Trump's longtime lawyer. He's been sentenced to 3 years for the crimes that Donald Trump directed him to commit, as well as $2 million roughly in total in fines, forfeitures, and restitution. We have even Fox News judge Andrew Napolitano saying that this is evidence that Donald Trump has committed a felony. Very separate question from whether there will ever be consequences for that. We'll talk about that later. Michael Cohen apologized in court yesterday. He said he felt it was his, quote, duty to cover up Donald Trump's, quote, dirty deeds, is how he referred to them. Dirty deeds not done dirt cheap in this case, going to be very expensive for Michael Cohen. Said that blind loyalty to Trump caused him to ignore his inner voice and his moral compass, which he claims to have. But ultimately, he says that he does blame himself, which makes sense. Donald Trump's current lawyer, not the former one going to prison, but the current lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, says that Cohen claiming he did these things out of loyalty to Trump is, quote, a complete lie, and that Cohen is a, quote, pathetic serial liar. When your current lawyer is calling your former lawyer, who's just been sentenced to 3 years in prison, for committing crimes at the direction of your client, when you call him a pathetic serial liar, you know things are continuing to get more and more interesting. And of course, the person that we know lied about the felonies committed by Cohen is Donald Trump. Donald Trump first claimed he had no idea about these hush money payments that were made by Michael Cohen to two of Donald Trump's mistresses, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Then he later said, oh, I actually did know about those payments, and came up with a whole other list of reasons why everything's fine. Cohen now has until March 6th to report to prison to start serving that sentence. And this is, there are people writing to me saying, David, there's evidence that there are two justice systems here, because Michael Cohen gets 3 years for really serious federal crimes. And lots of people get more than that just for possessing marijuana. And to that, I would say, you know, I agree with you. I've been talking about the fact that we have two justice systems in this country for a very long time, one for the rich, one for everybody else. But there is a difference here, which is that Robert Mueller asked for a substantial sentence for the crimes that were ultimately part of the deal that was struck. And Michael Cohen had a sort of different type of arrangement with Robert Mueller than others, but I believe that the maximum sentence would have been 4 years. So actually, based on what the charges and indictments and convictions were, it was close to the maximum sentence. Now, you can argue, well, is that what prosecutors should have gone for in the first place? That's sort of a different debate. But in this particular story, it's kind of a sidebar issue, because what we now have is Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor, Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign chairman, Rick Gates, Trump's former campaign advisor, and George Papadopoulos, Trump's former foreign policy advisor, who have either pled guilty, been convicted, been sentenced, or are already in prison. So this is a big picture that is a circle that is tightening around Donald Trump personally and Donald Trump's family. The Cohen verdict specifically now is important for a few different reasons. Number one, we now have a conviction for crimes that were directed by Donald Trump. Trump directed Cohen to commit these felonies. Number two, this is now a conviction and prison time for crimes directly related to the campaign. These were payoffs to women to keep them quiet so that they wouldn't mess with Trump's campaign. And then number three, the Cohen verdict is particularly important because every time a deal is made, anytime any kind of cooperation happens and then you get a conviction, the implication is that the information you gleaned from that individual, in this case Michael Cohen, is going to be used to fry a bigger fish, so to speak. And the really big news is that Michael Cohen will at some point, we are told, be telling the full story. His representative, Lanny Davis, put out a statement about this saying, Michael Cohen, former attorney to Donald Trump, continues to tell the truth about Donald Trump's misconduct over the years. At the appropriate time, after Mr. Mueller completes his investigation and issues his final report, I look forward to assisting Michael to state publicly all he knows about Mr. Trump. There is a lot, I would imagine, that Michael Cohen has to say. And at some point, we are going to hear that. But I don't want to stray too far from the main point. The sentencing memo from Robert Mueller says, in very plain English, that the felonies committed by Michael Cohen were committed at the direction of the President of the United States. So what we can't allow ourselves to be distracted from, Pat, is that someone is now going to prison for crimes committed as part of the 2016 campaign for Donald Trump, directed by President Donald Trump. If you look online, the right, the Trumpists, are going to try to distract you from that. That's the ball on which we need to keep our eyes.
And as Anthony Scaramucci said, the fish rots from the head down. It's hard to believe that all of his close associates are implicated in so many crimes, and yet he just has his hands clean. Trump is not guilty in any of this. I think this could be the beginning of the end for him, maybe.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that just everybody around Trump is criminal and Trump knew nothing about it, had no tacit approval or endorsement of those things, or was involved in any way. I mean, who would believe that at this point? Now, I will say, if you are waiting for Trump's approval rating to fall precipitously with this news, don't hold your breath, because it's not. Either the legal system will deal with this or Democrats will deal with this, but Trump's base is not going to abandon him, period. And so what we may see next is that it may get sort of quiet approaching the end of the year, or we may have bombshells before the end of the year. The truth is we don't know, because Robert Mueller's investigation has been airtight, no real leaks to speak of. So really anything could happen, and the timeline is going to be determined by Mueller and Mueller alone. Just when it looked like the felonious payoffs to Donald Trump's mistresses stuff was starting to wind down with the sentencing to 3 years in prison for Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, there's a totally new story related to these payoffs to Donald Trump's mistresses, and it just keeps getting worse and worse for Trump. The National Enquirer is a gossip magazine. It's owned by a company called American Media Incorporated, also known as AMI. Yesterday we learned, within minutes of the sentencing of Michael Cohen to 3 years in prison, we learned that AMI is now admitting that they made a $150,000 payment to an ex-Playboy model and Trump mistress named Karen McDougal in coordination with Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, the goal of which was to influence the results of the election. In other words, to help Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton. Federal prosecutors have agreed not to prosecute AMI in exchange for AMI accepting responsibility, cooperating with an investigation, and committing to making, quote, compliance improvements so that this doesn't ever happen again. Right. AMI had been the target of another federal investigation. And of course, like everyone associated with these payoffs, AMI lied. AMI first said, oh, no. These expenditures have nothing to do with the election. We have First Amendment rights. These are not illegal campaign contributions, nothing to see here. Then federal prosecutors went to AMI and showed them what they have. And instead now AMI is saying, yeah, we did it. And the prosecutor's office is saying that AMI has provided, quote, substantial and important assistance in an investigation that is still going on. Isn't it funny, Pat, or at least interesting, that nobody has any involvement or knowledge about what these prosecutors are talking about until they get in a room with the prosecutors, and then all of a sudden everybody's very interested in cooperating with the investigations?
Yeah, it seems like they're saying something that jogs their memory, or maybe it's that their lies are just not standing up, and then when they're presented with some sort of jail time or repercussions, they flip.
And this is particularly interesting because the National Enquirer previously said they have a, quote, safe full of Trump-related stories that they've worked on successfully, that they've, I guess we would say that they've successfully buried. That is a treasure trove that at any point could explode, and Donald Trump could have 10 new scandals on his hands. And as shocking as it might be, there could be way more felony payoffs, which we might learn about. Remember Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury? In that book, he quotes Steve Bannon, Trump's advisor, former advisor, as saying that one of Donald Trump's attorneys, quote, took care of 100 women during the presidential campaign. Not all of those, of course, would be former mistresses. They may have been individuals who had stories to tell that were not stories of being former mistresses. But that is the allegation in Michael Wolff's book. And there are rumblings, and I want to be really clear, these are merely rumblings. There are rumblings about Donald Trump forcing a woman to have an abortion and paying for it, which would bring a whole new meaning to the term the abortion bill as something other than a legislative proposal. And you would imagine, of course, that if Trump indeed did force a mistress to have an abortion, that his evangelical supporters would immediately abandon him. But I think that they'd still find a way to defend his actions because of, Hillary's emails, and she would have started a war with Syria or something like that. Send me your thoughts about how far do you think this goes? And by this, I mean the sort of umbrella of hush money payments, mistresses, shutting women up, that type of thing. How far do you think it goes? I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say thanks briefly to Patrick Farrell, who's today's new David Pakman Show member of the day. And I also want to thank Judith Brown, who's today's long-term member of the day. Almost 5 years of membership for Judith. Patrick, Judith, thank you. We now have a couple new things going on, actually, in terms of membership and supporting the program. Number one, we have a new coupon code. That code is This Is 2020. If you want to save 40% off of your David Pakman Show membership, use the coupon code This Is 2020 when you sign up on our website. Number two, we have all new Patreon targets, goals, and reward tiers at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Reward tiers start at just $1 a month. And then lastly, we were part of a beta on YouTube where you could be a member on YouTube for $4.99 a month. It's gone so well that YouTube has approached us and they have said, hey, we want to expand what you're offering where you can have 5 tiers of YouTube membership. That's going to launch by the end of the week. And you can find out more about that at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show. We will have membership tiers starting at as little as $1.99 a month. So check all of that out. All 3 ways to support the show, all very much appreciated. Okay, let's go to some interesting stories from the David Pakman Show subreddit, where nearly 8,000 of our viewers and listeners are subscribed for free to discuss politics and debate the news respectfully. davidpakman.com/Reddit, REDDIT, is where you can find that. Very interesting article posted this morning on the subreddit about new evidence of anti-Semitism with regard to the Women's March co-chairs. This is an article. Let me tell you a story about this article. I have been covering the anti-Semitism linked Women's March co-chairs for a very long time at this point. And for the most part, the audience appreciates it. But there are still people who reach out to me and say, David, you're just wrong. You're wrong. There's no evidence of anti-Semitism linked to the Women's March co-chairs. Tablet Magazine published a devastating article with specific conversations and a whole bunch of new allegations regarding anti-Semitic links. And the reason I'm not covering it separately is that I've already covered it so much. It's just more confirmation of what I already knew. But here is an interesting tidbit. Journalists I am in touch with who have tweeted about, written about this report about anti-Semitism within the upper ranks of the Women's March have been approached by a PR company claiming to have sort of counterpoints, counterfactuals to the allegations made in the Tablet Magazine article. And from what I've reviewed so far, and I can't say who shared it with me because they are being approached and only told they will be given this list of counterfactuals on the condition of not talking about it for the time being. The counterfactuals are very shaky. So there is actually an entire PR effort now to try to diffuse what are increasingly credible claims of anti-Semitism within the ranks of the Women's March leadership. I want to be clear about that. No surprise. I've been talking about this for more than a year. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, an interesting post, which is a video I had never seen before. Years ago, our friend Sam Cedar over at The Majority Report appeared on CNN when the entire concept of the war on Christmas was ramping up. And Sam debated some religious apologist who believed that there really is a war on Christmas, or there was at the time, and Christians are being discriminated against. Sam trolled it so brilliantly, suggesting that Christmas may be linked to terrorism and that they figured it out by torturing an elf. I mean, just brilliant trolling. And I don't know if you've watched this, Pat, but neither the host, Kira Phillips, nor the guy Trump was debating, Bob something, had any idea how to handle it. And it's just one of the most brilliant pieces of corporate media trolling I've seen.
Well, the host couldn't contain herself. That I really enjoyed. I thought it was very funny. And to this day, I don't know if the war on Christmas has been won or lost. I don't know who won or lost it. What's been going on with that?
Yeah, who are the players in the war on Christmas? How do you define winning and losing? And given the fact that almost everybody continues celebrating Christmas in the United States, something like 90% celebrate Christmas at least to some degree, it seems like a war that whoever is waging it is doing an extraordinarily poor job of, because Christmas still seems to be alive and well. Check that out. That's linked to on the subreddit, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Submit your stories. Submit your guest suggestions for the show. Submit your criticisms about me. There's no shortage of those on the subreddit, but keep them respectful, please, because we have moderators making sure that you kids keep it clean on there. We couldn't have it any other way. An unfortunate theme of the Trump administration is that the world laughs at us. Okay, the United Nations General Assembly laughed at Donald Trump when he tried claiming that his administration has accomplished more than any American presidential administration in history. The leaders of Mexico and Canada were visibly stunned as Donald Trump couldn't figure out how to sign a piece of paper. We've covered many examples of the world laughing at Trump on the program before. Climate talks got underway in Poland. And as I told you yesterday, the United States is already in this coalition with Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, who are not welcoming an IPCC report about climate change. They are saying, we don't want to welcome this. We're okay noting it, but we don't want it being any kind of central piece of the climate talks in Poland. Why? Because those are some of the biggest oil-producing countries in the world, and they don't want a piece of evidence welcomed which says the activities of those four oil-producing countries are a major part of the problem we're experiencing on planet Earth. Okay, so cut to yesterday in Poland. Donald Trump sent a guy named Wells Griffith. Griffith is Trump's advisor on energy and climate. That's who went to the conference. He gets up there and he promotes coal and fossil fuels at a climate conference. And the crowd literally laughs out loud, and then a protest breaks out. Take a look at the video.
Clear that energy innovation and fossil fuels will continue to play a leading role. Energy access.
Yikes.
I hope you'll give us a chance.
Yeah, so I think the chant is keep it in the ground, like keep the fossil fuels in the ground. So, okay, in the defense of Wells Griffith, far be it for me to issue a defense of going to a climate conference and suggesting that coal and fossil fuels are what we should be focusing on. In this guy's defense, this was not spontaneous laughter. I'm aware of that. The crowd was ready with a banner and a chant, and it was a coordinated protest. But it doesn't change the reality, Pat, that going to a climate conference representing one of four countries opposed to this IPCC climate study and talking about fossil fuels, it is a joke. And the only reasonable response to that, other than crying, is laughter.
Like, what do you expect to happen? I mean, you're going in there taking the opposite view of pretty much everyone at that conference, if not everyone at that conference. You deserve to be laughed at. Like, the goals that they're trying to accomplish, you're at complete odds with.
Who sends a coal guy to a climate conference in 2018? It's a sham and an embarrassment. And we are in a time where the right has been very successful at stigmatizing things that really shouldn't be stigmatized. The right has won at stigmatizing science as left-wing when it's just science. The right has stigmatized education as liberal indoctrination because when you are educated, you realize that those silly right-wing ideas make no sense and you become more likely to be progressive. But education in and of itself is not liberal indoctrination, but they've framed it as such. The right has stigmatized decency and empathy as being liberal extreme points of view. But when it comes specifically to the climate, they have associated fossil fuels with economic prosperity, which is what's backwards. You can't have a successful economy when the planet's destroyed, right? If our coastal cities are underwater, that's really bad for jobs. That's really bad for manufacturing. That's really bad for transportation. That's bad for the economy. It's terrible, okay? Environmental sustainability should be seen as economically advantageous because it is. Even if it weren't economically advantageous, it might still be the right thing to do. Even if, for example, slavery kept costs down when slavery was legal, if slavery was profitable, it still could be wrong and we should still stop it. And in this case, it just so happens that when it comes to the climate and the environment and energy, the economically advantageous thing happens to also be the morally correct thing. Great. What a wonderful coincidence. But they have successfully framed it as the opposite. Good luck trying to convert the current administration over to the reality of the world. Until they're gone, this isn't going to change. And so our goal needs to basically be two parallel goals. Number one, mitigate the damage done to the environment and on this issue of climate by the Trump administration as much as possible, because they're not going to change. Limit the damage they're able to do. And we've got to get these people the hell out of there, right? Because that's the only chance we have. And if it doesn't happen in 2020, that's going to be 4 more years of this nonsense. An absolute and total joke. The United States, which Trump said was a laughingstock under Obama, even though it wasn't, right? I mean, every poll showed that respect for the United States was up once President Obama replaced George W. Bush. Now we are literally the laughingstock of the world, and you have a candidate in Trump, a president in Trump, whose followers see that laughter from the rest of the world as a badge of honor because they believe we just know the truth and everybody else is wrong. Absolutely ridiculous. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at David Pakman Show, where we now have really great clips from the show with subtitles, very shareable, really, really great stuff, including maybe this story will make it on there, at David Pakman Show on Instagram. While you're there, you can follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. We will take a break. Next, I will speak to Lacy. What is in the cards for human-robot interaction in the next 5 to 10 years? That's what we'll talk about right after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Lacy, who's a reporter for Adweek, where she covers technology and marketing. We are going to be talking today about robots, robotics, human-robot relationships, which will be a thing at some point. I mean, maybe that's a good place to start, Lisa. A lot of the technology for sort of consumer robots that could do a lot of day-to-day sort of tasks, chores, activities, the technology is already out there. Why haven't we seen more availability and adoption of these consumer robots?
I think price is probably the biggest hurdle. I mean, you see a lot of these robot startups. I think Jibo is one of them. It was very cute, but it was like $900. And I think $900 is a lot to ask for something that essentially does the same things as like an Echo or a Google Home. Even that Sony came out with its robot dog not too long ago. And I forget exactly how much money it was, but I mean, it's thousands of dollars. So these are still big investments. And I think that's why it's still limited to early adopters.
Can you talk a little bit about the sort of difference that exists between robotics and artificial intelligence? Because I think when you talk to a lot of people about the future of robots interacting with humans, participating in humans' day-to-day lives, there's sometimes some kind of blurring about whether we're talking about robots or AI or robots that learn via AI. We're really talking about two separate things here, though.
Yeah, I mean, it gets very complicated very quickly. I mean, I think the simplest definition is a robot is something that can perform a task over and over again, whereas artificial intelligence is the ability to exhibit human-like intelligence. And from there, I mean, the lines blur and it gets very complicated, but that's sort of the simplest way to put it.
In one article you wrote, I read that, that there are a number of experts who say that within 5 to 20 years, humans will be, quote, outsmarted by AI. On the other hand, chess is an area where robots or AI are already defeating humans. Jeopardy is another area. What is the difference between these sort of narrow parameters where AI can be better, more intelligent, although maybe that's not the right term to use, than humans, versus what we're talking about at some point in the future?
Well, I mean, you're right. Like, there's no need to panic just yet. I mean, I think there was I think one of my favorites was that bot that was fed a bunch of names of paint and then asked to create names for different colors of paint, and the names were often hilarious. So, I mean, it's sort of as it stands, you know, these artificial intelligence things are very good at distinct tasks. And so they're not going to take over the world just yet. But I mean, I think one of the things that I found in my reporting is that, you know, we've never been at a point in time where machines are smarter than us. And it's coming. And that was, I think, one of the most sort of startling realizations for really the whole newsroom, or the people that I worked with on this story anyway, because I mean, 5 to 20 years is not that long. And we really don't know what's going to happen. And so it sort of made me question, you know, why are we doing this? If we, I mean, it could solve a bunch of problems that we haven't been able to solve on our own, but it could also sort of be the end of humanity. So it seems like a very big gamble to me, but I don't make those decisions.
Well, to be less speculative, I guess, what's in development now? What's in development now that we know is sort of on the several-year time horizon from some of the maybe more well-known tech companies, but also some of the ones that are maybe less well-known and specialize in this area?
Well, Amazon is reportedly working on something to sort of take Echo to the next level. I mean, they're not commenting on that, but I don't think it's all that surprising. They've been moving further and further into the home. I think I'm going to get them mixed up, but there's a company I think called Vector, and it has a robot called, is it Anki, A-N-K-I, that's kind of a cute little, I don't know, machine guy, and he's got eyes and a personality and stuff. And they're really focused on that emotional quotient in addition to the intelligence. I mean, it's still, you're looking at a very kind of like Echo-like or Google Home-like device that is going to, you know, tell you the weather. And I think it can play cards as well. I don't think it can order paper towels. So again, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge psychological component here when we talk about the sort of like anthropomorphizing of these robots and giving something like an AI a physical presence that resembles what humans are used to sort of interacting to. In the reporting and research you've done and people you've talked to, how much is that being considered in the development work that these companies are doing?
You mean how human should they be, or will they be? I think the answer is that they'll be very human. I mean, that's sort of the initial question that I started with when Alexa was laughing and sort of creeping people out. So I asked that question, how human should voice assistants be, and realized that they're going to be very human. And I think in some of the research from SingularityNet, they talk about how, like, in order to avoid killer robots, like they're working on robots that meditate and do good things, and they're sort of hoping to counter, I think, anything bad that comes from the government or wherever else. And a big part of that is that they have to have a human form in order to interact with people. And it's for us too. It gives us sort of a construct within to interact with them. I mean, that's kind of why Alexa, Google Assistant doesn't have a name, but they have voices and they sort of have personalities, and it's just sort of to give us kind of a baseline to interact with them, and from there, as they take on bigger roles in our lives, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them also take on more sort of human forms.
What's likely to sort of remain off limits for robots and AI, if anything? And I guess that could be for a couple different reasons. One would be that there might be certain types of tasks that robots and AI just can't do. They won't be able to do. The other side would be that as humans, we might decide there are certain tasks that we just don't want to allow to be done by anybody other than humans. Either or both reason, what are some of those tasks that you're coming across?
Well, I think that was one of the conclusions that I came to after reporting all of this, is that, as my friend Jason Snyders, the chief technology officer at Kraft, always says, that technology has surpassed our morality and our legislation, and that eventually we're going to have these conversations about what we want robots to do, what we don't want them to do, and kind of redefine sort of what it means to be human, and as well as our expectations of privacy. I mean, these things are collecting data, and they come from companies that have their own sort of motivations and goals. Having an Alexa or Google Home in your home it's not just a handy little thing to tell you what time it is or what the weather is. I mean, they're gathering data on you, and they're using that somehow. So I think just there has to be some kind of conversation at some point about what sort of limitations and what role we want them to play in our lives, or we may end up getting kind of blindsided.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the other issues that we've seen, I mean, just this week we had extraordinarily uninformed elected officials, both Democrats and Republicans, asking very, very strange questions to Google CEO, including, for example, asking the CEO of Google to explain how their competitor Apple's iPhone works. So we saw this with child porn legislation in terms of what constitutes possessing it on your computer, and the law was very far behind the sort of practical realities. We're already seeing it when it comes to a lot of the tech regulation. Are we not likely to get into the exact same problem, but maybe even more acutely when it comes to the regulation of robotics and AI?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a very real possibility. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of, I feel like consumers are finally starting to realize sort of how much data about themselves is out there, but whether that ends up resulting in something like regulations for Facebook, Google, et cetera, I don't know. I've been really interested in the decentralized web, sort of the new internet. If you ever watched HBO's Silicon Valley, that's sort of what they're working on, where the basic idea is you get rid of the middleman, Facebook, Google, Amazon, whoever it is, and just it's very complicated, but the internet is made up of 7 layers. And so if you're using Facebook, Google, whatever, you're on the top layer, the app layer. With this decentralized web, you're going further down. And so I've been curious whether, and you're able to, since you don't need them, you have to sort of depend on each other. That's why they're called peer-to-peer networks for storage. And so I'm curious whether ultimately consumers will revolt and say that they don't like this and go for these peer-to-peer networks where they can take more ownership of their data. But at the same time, I was talking to one of the sort of fathers of the internet, who was telling me that he likened it to training to become a Jedi. Like it will require a much more active role on behalf of users, and people are generally pretty lazy. So I honestly don't know. That's one of the things that I'm really eager to see in 2019, sort of how that plays out.
The more that I read about this stuff, the more convinced I am that the technology side of it is sort of just an inevitability. It's more of like a when and in exactly what iteration than if sort of thing. And the bigger questions for me are, what does this mean about the role of humans in life, right? And I'm curious whether you've talked to some of the people that are working on these technologies, either on the robotics or AI side, about once humans no longer are needed for all of these different tasks, what is it that is going to fill the time on the planet of what those people are doing? Like, is that something that they think about?
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that you say that because I feel like I'm being a pompous jerk right now, but I'm reading The Feminine Mystique for the first time, and sort of a similar parallel in there with sort of how once women housewives got vacuums and washing machines and dishwashers, they suddenly had all sorts of time on their hands to sort of contemplate what they were doing with their lives, which led to this sort of dissatisfaction and wondering what was wrong with them and why they weren't happy with what they had been sort of told their whole lives they were supposed to aspire to. So I know I don't know what it means. I mean, it's anybody's guess. I'm not sure we've figured out the feminine mystique part of it, and that's been going on for quite a long time. So yeah, I don't know what to say about what we'll do when we have all these robot helpers.
But it's safe to say the people that are developing these technologies, they don't seem to be huge on exploring that part, at least not when you're talking to them.
You mean like taking away jobs and things like that?
Just more generally, I mean, when you go and you talk to someone who's working on these projects, either on the robotics or AI side, and you discuss what the possible future uses are and how these technologies will interact with humans, does it even come up, does it even occur to them to say, yes, and that will free up humans to do, I don't know, X, Y, Z, or that's just not really something they talk about with you?
It's not something that I've talked to them about. I mean, that's not to say that they're not thinking about it. I mean, I feel like a big part of it is certainly how to tap into these technologies to, make life better in the future. And that is sort of one of the hopes, I think, that these artificially intelligent systems will be able to figure out things that we haven't been able to solve on our own. But again, we'll see what happens, I guess, right? That's why this is sort of such a huge gamble. So I think one of the things that I'm going to look into some point next year is sort of just because we can build these things, should we?
Yes, that's an important question, which increasingly people are emailing me about. We've been speaking with Lacy, reporter for Adweek, where she covers technology and marketing. Lisa, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There has been a horrible terror attack in Strasbourg, France. And as of just a few hours ago, 3 people were killed, 12 injured by the shooter, who is a man known to law enforcement in the city of Strasbourg, France. This happened near a Christmas market at one of the city's central squares. The motive is unclear. The shooter was at large as of last night. What we do know about the 29-year-old shooter is that he was born in Strasbourg, right? In the same city and country where the attack took place. That's where the shooter was born. He was reportedly, according to French law enforcement, radicalized to an extreme form of Islam while he was in prison. Go figure. So this takes place, absolutely horrifying terror attack. And what does our president say? Well, Donald Trump tweets in response to this terror attack, another very bad terror attack in France. We are going to strengthen our borders even more. Chuck and Nancy must give us the votes to get additional border security, of course, referring to the abortive meeting with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, where Trump is trying to convince them to vote for his U.S.-Mexico border wall. So let's analyze this on its merits and think about whether it makes any sense. A French-born man shoots people in the city of his birth, born in Strasbourg, shoots people in Strasbourg. And Donald Trump uses that to justify a wall between the United States and Mexico. Now, you could be for or against the Mexican wall, right? I've pointed out that most undocumented immigrants are not coming in through that border physically. So I've questioned the value of that wall. Certainly the United States legally can build it. You can debate whether you want the wall or you don't want the wall. But there is no argument that Donald Trump's tweet has any bearing on, or rather that the attack in France has any bearing on the building of the wall. And that's what Donald Trump is tweeting about. It's unrelated. There is no connection between the building, the value, the virtue of building a Mexican border wall when there is a shooting in France perpetrated in the city where a French man was born. Now, the other interpretation is, well, a French man shooting people in France is evidence of the need for a U.S.-Mexico border wall, because Trump is implying that French shooters like this guy will go to Mexico and then come into the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border wall. That's extraordinarily dumb, but it doesn't actually seem to be what Donald Trump is saying. So where I end up on this, Pat, is that this is about the shooter being a brown-skinned Muslim. We talk about destructive identity politics and identity as a factor that informs what people think and how people react and what their beliefs are. Anyone who pays attention to this show knows that I don't dance around, I don't obfuscate that most terror in the world is committed by men who are Muslim. I have no interest in hiding that or apologizing for it. It's just the truth. In this case, though, Donald Trump is taking advantage of this imagery of a brown-skinned Muslim man radicalized in a French prison to talk about building a U.S.-Mexico border wall. What other connection is there, Pat? Brown people in Mexico and a brown guy did the shooting. I can't think of any other way in which that shooting relates to the U.S.-Mexico border wall.
And offhand, I can't think of any instance where a terrorist from Mexico or another part of Latin America came here through undocumented immigration and committed an act of terrorism here in the United States. Now, I'm sure there are some, but there certainly isn't any example that comes to mind offhand. I think he makes the argument, though, that someone from the Middle East is going to somehow make it over to Latin America and then come up and cross the border illegally. Now, why they would do that, I have no idea, but that's the argument that he's been trying to make.
Yeah, no other explanation really makes sense that it's in one way or another, either the way Pat suggested or the way I'm suggesting, related to the fact that this was a brown-skinned terrorist. Because remember, after the Florida high school shooting, after the Thousand Oaks shooting, after the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, and many others which have also had nothing to do with people coming to the United States, Trump said nothing about the wall because the perpetrators were white. No wall anywhere would have prevented what happened in France. No wall would have prevented the incidents that Donald Trump chooses not to make about the U.S.-Mexico border wall. So using it to justify walls is silly, except for the fact that the guy is brown. And of course, this also ignores that in the United States, since every country has its own problems, most of the terrorists in the United States are domestically born white men. I mean, I know people don't like to hear that. There are people who consider themselves realists of different kinds who don't like to hear that, but that's the reality. And so we have an increasingly desperate Donald Trump. The shellacking that he got from Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in the Oval Office on Tuesday really left him rattled, and he's making even less sense than usual, and this is what we get. Strasbourg-born man shoots people in Strasbourg. Clearly, the United States needs a U.S.-Mexico border wall. If there is another more charitable interpretation of this that I've not mentioned, get in touch, because I have no interest in unfairly criticizing this. I think we've sort of explored all of the possibilities about what was going on in Trump's mind here. We've discussed the sentencing of Donald Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, to 3 years in prison. We talked about that at the top of the show. There's a funny little sidebar story to the Cohen sentencing, which involves Fox News host Sean Hannity. We learned during the Michael Cohen fiasco that Sean Hannity had a relationship with Michael Cohen. Initially, Cohen said he represented Sean Hannity. we learned that Cohen had only 3 clients, Donald Trump, Hannity, and one other party that I can't remember offhand. Hannity denied it, saying, no, Cohen never formally represented me, but I would sometimes bring him legal questions where I just wanted like his general opinion on some kind of informal basis. But in court, Cohen revealed that Hannity was a client of his. So I tend to believe that Hannity's the one lying about this. The point is, Hannity liked Cohen at some point. Hannity knows Cohen, and Hannity has, on at least an informal basis, if not more formal, sought legal advice from Michael Cohen. There were numerous stories that Hannity did on his show about Michael Cohen where he didn't make any mention of the fact that he is interviewing someone or talking about someone who has given him legal advice, who he has a legal relationship with. So there's a connection there that would be relevant to his commentary about Cohen. He never made that clear. Just hours before Michael Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in prison yesterday, Sean Hannity was caught deleting a bunch of tweets related to Michael Cohen. Hannity deleted close to 300 tweets, including at least 5 specifically related to Michael Cohen. Of course, we still have access to these. Some examples include that infamous denial that Sean Hannity made of Michael Cohen's representation of him, saying, quote, Michael Cohen has never represented me in any matter. I never retained him, received an invoice, or paid legal fees. I have occasionally had brief discussions with him about legal questions about which I wanted his input and perspective. Now, of course, look at the language being used there, right? He never represented me in a matter. Well, that has a specific legal meaning. I never retained him. Okay. I never received an invoice. I never paid legal fees. Well, what if it was Hannity's business partner who did? Or what if it was a shell company controlled by Hannity for his real estate holdings, which paid Michael Cohen? We just don't know. My point is, we can't glean anything from this tweet about the spirit of the relationship, but that tweet has since been deleted by Sean Hannity. Another example of a deleted tweet from Hannity. Dan Bongino and Rick Unger join me next to debate the media's coverage of the raid on Michael Cohen's office. Why delete that one? Well, that was a segment during which the entire investigation of Michael Cohen was written off as politically motivated nonsense. Not a great tweet once the guy's been sentenced to 3 years in prison. Now, a counter argument that I've seen floating around, Pat, is, David, he deleted like more than 250 tweets. Only 5 had to do with Cohen. This isn't about deleting tweets that have anything to do with Cohen. He's just deleting old tweets. Give me a break. Hannity is smart enough to realize, Pat, that if you don't want it to seem like the point is to delete tweets about Cohen, even though you did it as his sentencing was going on, you also delete a bunch of other tweets that are relatively innocuous. That's a known method.
Yeah, and you got to give him a little bit of credit because it's somewhat clever. Instead of just deleting the tweets having to do with Michael Cohen, you also delete some 100, 200 innocuous ones. I like it. It's a good strategy.
Yeah, it's an obvious strategy, but it is one that other people have also employed. Now, I want to go back to the content of one of these tweets. Sean Hannity's net worth is reportedly in the hundreds of millions or close to 100 million. It's an insane amount of money. His salary is, by some accounts, more than $25 million a year. Why is he running legal questions by Michael Cohen? Like, whether it's on a formal or informal basis, isn't it a little weird that Hannity is even going to Cohen for advice? Does that not suggest that there may be more to this relationship than simply Hannity finds Cohen to be a competent attorney?
Yeah, didn't at one point Hannity said that like maybe he gave Cohen $10 at a party sometime. If you're worth like tens of millions of dollars, what is $10 to you? That's just not a transaction that would happen among two rich folks.
It's a very, very strange thing, and I think that there is much more to it. And in any case, the entire apparatus is in panic here. I was talking to a friend who works in media in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and she told me that she's been talking to people behind the scenes, and they are in full panic about how much do you want to distance yourself from what's going on. But at the same time, you don't want to go so crazy distancing yourself that you draw more attention to yourself, if that makes sense. And a lot of people are sort of in that situation right now. And I don't have advice for them. My advice would have been not to have become involved in the first place. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting question that came in about maybe an unintended consequence of the Trump-Russia investigation. Let's take a listen to it.
Oh, yes. Hi, David. Just calling in regards to the coverage that's been going on a lot, since 2016, basically, with the 2016 election, the hacking, basically the Russiagate story. I just want to ask you a question about that. In regards to that story throughout, the time since 2016 and the coverage from the left wing, right wing, particularly on the left wing, wondering if this coverage has inadvertently made Trump somewhat of a sympathetic figure. There's some media outlets that constantly bash Trump, some without any evidence.
It just ends there.
So the question is, abrupt ending. The question is, does the Trump-Russia investigation inadvertently make Trump a more sympathetic character? The answer is yes, but only to people who already sympathize with him. In other words, or believe that the Trump-Russia investigation is bogus. How anyone can still argue that, given the number of years in prison cumulatively that have been doled out as a result, I don't know how someone can still say that. So yeah, if you believe that the Trump-Russia investigation is bogus and you are a Trumpist, you probably do feel bad that they're going after Trump in this way. But most people are not in that boat, and the people who are, either way, are defenders of Trump. So I understand what the caller is saying, Pat, but I don't think that the Trump-Russia investigation makes Trump a sympathetic character in a way that materially changes the balance of how people pursue him.
Right.
Perceive him, rather.
For me, as a non-Trumpist, I only have so much sympathy to go around. And I'm not going to waste it on some billionaire leader of the free world who is committing crimes and trying to get away with them. Like, I have higher priorities than that.
I completely agree with you. And I think that's a very good point. On today's bonus show, I am going to talk to you about what is taking place next week with my jury duty. I think people will find this interesting. Also on the bonus show, Theresa May, British Prime Minister, survives a no confidence vote. We will talk about that. We will talk about later start times working well for teenagers in Seattle. I've been advocating for that since I had to start high school at 7:25 in the morning. And much more on today's bonus show. I would love to see you or talk to you on the bonus show. Get access by becoming a member at www.joinpakman.com, by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show, and soon by becoming a YouTube subscriber, member, I guess it's called, at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show. Speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.